Someone want to tell me why there's a lost tourist standing in my compound with a badge she probably printed at Office Depot? Senior Chief Petty Officer Bryce Hannigan's voice rang out across the gravel courtyard of Naval Special Warfare Group 2's restricted training annex like a rifle crack at dawn. He stood at the center of a loose semicircle of 12 Navy SEALs, operators from Team 4's Alpha Platoon, men whose biceps strained against faded tan t-shirts and whose eyes carried the flat, predatory calm of human beings who had been professionally trained to end life in silence. They had just completed a 14-mile ruck in the August heat of Virginia Beach, and their skin was glazed with salt and dried sweat, their boots caked with sand from the soft trails that wound through the pine barrens behind the compound. They were tired, they were irritable, and Senior Chief Hannigan had just given them a target. She was standing near the entry checkpoint, a woman, maybe 5'3", early 30s, wearing plain civilian clothes that looked like they had been pulled from a Goodwill rack without deliberation, faded olive cargo pants a size too large, cinched at the waist with a frayed nylon belt, a black long-sleeve shirt despite the 90-degree heat, sleeves pushed down to her wrists as though she were cold or hiding something, or both. No jewelry, no makeup, hair the color of wet sand pulled into a braid so tight it could have been welded to her skull. On a black lanyard around her neck hung an identification badge, not the standard navy blue common access card that every service member and contractor in the Department of Defense carried, but something different, something none of them had ever seen. It was matte black with no photograph, no name, and a single horizontal stripe of deep crimson running across its center. In the lower right corner, embossed rather than printed, was a 7-digit alphanumeric code and nothing else. Hannigan walked toward her with the bow-legged swagger of a man who had spent 22 years in naval special warfare and believed, with the unshakable conviction of the professionally violent, that there was no one on earth he could not intimidate. He was 6'1", 235 pounds of functional muscle packed onto a frame that had been forged by Bud S., hardened by 11 combat deployments, and decorated with enough ink to wallpaper a studio apartment. A trident was tattooed on his left deltoid. A reaper's scythe curved across his right forearm. His neck was the width of a fire hydrant, and his jaw looked like it had been carved from the same granite they used to build war memorials. He smelled like gunpowder residue and Cope wintergreen, and the aggressive synthetic musk of a body spray that cost $4 and announced its presence from 15 feet away. The SEALs behind him fanned out instinctively, a pack responding to the body language of its alpha, their amusement growing as Hannigan closed the distance to the woman by the checkpoint. "You," Hannigan said, stopping 3 feet in front of her. He pointed at the badge. "What is that?" "Authorization," she said. One word. No inflection, no deference, no qualifier. Just the word, delivered with the tonal flatness of a GPS giving directions to a destination it does not care whether you reach. Hannigan's left eye twitched. It was a small movement, involuntary, the physiological signature of a man whose dominance has been challenged so rarely that his nervous system doesn't have a practiced response for it. "Authorization," he repeated, turning to his platoon with a grin that spread slowly across his face like oil across water. "She says it's authorization. Fellas, you ever seen a badge like that? Because in 22 years and 4 continents, I haven't seen a badge like that. You know what I have seen? My 12-year-old nephew's fake FBI badge from the costume store. Looked a lot like this one, actually. Had about as much authority, too." The laughter came. It always came. Petty Officer First Class. Jennings brayed like a donkey. Petty Officer Second Class Marchetti clapped his hands together once, hard, the sound sharp as a gunshot. The others grinned and nudged each other, 12 predators amused by what they perceived to be prey that had wandered into the wrong ecosystem. The woman did not laugh. She did not flinch. She did not explain. She stood with her weight distributed evenly across both feet, in a stance so neutral it was almost architectural. Hips square, shoulders down, hands relaxed at her sides with the fingers naturally curled, not clenched. It was a stance that communicated nothing and concealed everything. A stance that any hand-to-hand combat instructor worth his salt would have recognized immediately as a ready position so refined that it had transcended technique and become posture. She breathed. In through the nose, 4 counts. Hold, 4 counts. Out through the mouth, 4 counts. The rhythm was invisible to Hannigan and his platoon. It was not invisible to everyone. Seated on an overturned ammunition crate near the armory door, 50 feet from the confrontation, was Master Chief Special Warfare Operator Vincent Padre Cisneros. He was 59 years old, built like a tree stump, and so deeply tanned that his skin had the texture of old leather left in the sun. He had a silver beard trimmed close to his jaw, and eyes the color of dishwater, pale, gray, and absolutely devoid of anything resembling sentimentality. He had been a SEAL for 36 years. He had been a member of DevGru, the unit the media called SEAL Team 6 and the men who served in it called simply the Command, for 19 of those years. He had retired from active operations 5 years ago, and now served as a senior training advisor, a role that was part consultant, part historian, and part institutional conscience. Padre Cisneros was not laughing. He was watching the woman the way a seismologist watches a needle, not because of what it's doing now, but because of what its movement implies about what is about to happen. He had noticed her arrival 12 minutes ago, before Hannigan's platoon had returned from their ruck. She had come through the main gate in a vehicle he didn't recognize, a flat black SUV with government plates that didn't match any agency prefix in his considerable mental database. She had exited the vehicle and walked to the checkpoint with a gait that had stopped him mid-sip of his coffee. Not because it was unusual, because it was too usual, too perfect. The kind of walk that is only achieved by someone who has been taught to move through hostile environments without creating a visual signature. No arm swing, no head bob, no rhythm that could be tracked or anticipated. The walk of a ghost. Now he watched her stand in front of Hannigan, absorbing his ridicule like bedrock absorbing rain, and he felt something he had not felt in years. He felt the fine hairs on the back of his neck rise in the ancient mammalian warning that preceded the recognition of a superior predator. "All right, sweetheart, here's what's going to happen." Hannigan crossed his arms, his trident tattoo flexing obscenely across his deltoid. "You're going to hand me that little Halloween badge. Tell me who let you onto this compound, and then you're going to walk back out that gate and go find whatever yoga studio or CrossFit box you wandered away from. This is a Tier 1 facility. We don't do tours, we don't do ride-alongs, and we sure as hell don't entertain whatever this," he gestured at her entire person with a dismissive wave, "is." She looked at him. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they held a quality that Hannigan, for all his experience, for all his deployments, for all his confirmed operations in environments where the margin between survival and death was measured in milliseconds, did not have the frame of reference to identify. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was recognition. She was looking at him the way a demolitions expert looks at an unexploded ordnance, with the calm, professional acknowledgement of something dangerous that is not yet realized it is already inert. "I'm here for the assessment," she said. Same flat voice, same economy of words, not a syllable more than necessary. "Assessment." Hannigan uncrossed his arms. "What assessment? There's no assessment on my schedule. There's no assessment on the OIC's schedule. There's no assessment on anyone's schedule. I would know because nothing happens on this compound without going through me." He stepped closer, close enough that his shadow fell across her face, close enough that the wintergreen on his breath was a tangible presence between them. "So either you've got the wrong base, the wrong branch, or the wrong country, because there is no assessment." He reached for her badge. Not a grab, a reach. The casual, entitled extension of a hand that was accustomed to taking things from people without asking. The physical vocabulary of a man who had confused proximity to violence with ownership of the world. She moved. It was so subtle that most of the SEALs didn't even register it as movement. She simply wasn't where his hand expected her to be. A quarter-step pivot, weight transferring from her center to her rear foot and back again, in a motion so fluid it looked like a camera glitch, like a frame had been deleted from reality. Hannigan's fingers closed on air. His hand hung there, empty, grasping at the space where her badge had been a half-second earlier. Padre Cisneros set down his coffee. His hand was trembling, not from age, from adrenaline, because he had just witnessed a technique, a specific evasion micro-movement, that he had seen exactly once before in his entire career. It had been during a joint training exercise at a facility in North Carolina that did not appear on any map, where operators from a program so classified that it was referred to only by a color designation, not even an acronym, just a color, had demonstrated close quarters techniques that made DevGru's best operators look like they were moving through wet concrete. The woman who had demonstrated that particular evasion, the quarter-step pivot with the weight transfer, had been the lead instructor. She had been introduced by a first name only, no rank, no branch, no unit, and the general overseeing the exercise had addressed her not with the familiarity of a superior speaking to a subordinate, but with the careful deference of a man speaking to someone whose authority existed in a dimension his stars could not reach. That had been 9 years ago. Cisneros had been told to forget the exercise. He had been told to forget the techniques. He had been told, specifically and emphatically, to forget the instructor. He had failed. What the? Hannigan's face darkened. The veins in his neck surfaced like cables under tension. He was not accustomed to missing. He was not accustomed to being evaded. In his world, his body was the final argument, the ultimate credential, and it had just been rendered irrelevant by a woman half his size without her even appearing to try. Did you just? He stepped forward again, and this time, there was no ambiguity in his posture. He was squaring up. His shoulders rotated forward, his weight shifted to the balls of his feet, and his hands came up to chest level in the instinctive pre-combat geometry of a man who had been trained in hand-to-hand combat by some of the best fighters on the planet. You want to play games? Fine, let's see that badge. He reached again, faster this time, a direct grab for the lanyard around her neck, the kind of aggressive space-closing movement that worked on insurgents in dark rooms and detainees in holding facilities, and anyone else who had ever made the mistake of being within arm's reach of Senior Chief Bryce Hannigan when he wanted something. She didn't pivot this time. She redirected. His hand came in and she guided it past her with a movement that was so gentle, so effortless, so biomechanically precise, that it looked like she was helping him reach for something behind her. His momentum carried him forward a half-step past her, and for one instant, one crystalline, revelatory instant, his body was oriented away from her and her right hand was positioned at the base of his skull, in what anyone with CQB training would have recognized as a lethal control position. She could have ended him. In that fraction of a second, with that hand placement, she could have executed a technique that would have separated his brainstem from his spinal cord before his next synapse fired. She didn't. She simply let her hand drop and stepped back to her original position, as if resetting a demonstration for students who weren't ready for the advanced material. But the SEALs had seen it. Not all of them understood what they had seen, but Jennings did. Jennings had spent 6 months at an interagency combatives school, where the curriculum included neutralization techniques from programs that officially did not exist, and he recognized the hand position. His mouth opened slightly. He looked at Marchetti. Marchetti looked back at him. Something unspoken and deeply uncomfortable passed between them. Padre Cisneros stood up from his ammunition crate. His coffee fell to the gravel. He did not pick it up. He was moving toward the armory door, where a secure landline connected directly to the compound's operations center. He needed to make a call. He needed to make it right now. Because if this woman was who he thought she was, then what was about to happen to Senior Chief Hannigan would make a court-martial look like a parking ticket. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were better than you, hit that like button and subscribe right now. You won't believe what happens next. Hannigan recovered his footing. His face was now the color of a brick. The humiliation of being maneuvered in front of his own platoon by a woman who weighed 120 pounds and hadn't even broken her breathing rhythm was metabolizing into something dangerous, something reckless. Hold her, he said to Jennings and Marchetti. I'm calling base security. This woman is trespassing on a restricted facility, and I want her in a holding room in the next 5 minutes. Jennings didn't move. Neither did Marchetti. For the first time in their years under Hannigan's command, they hesitated. Something in the geometry of the moment had shifted. Some invisible load-bearing wall had cracked, and the structure of obedience that had always held firm was suddenly showing fractures. Did I stutter? Hannigan barked. Before either man could respond, a sound came from beyond the main gate. The low rumble of vehicles. Not one vehicle, multiple. The gravel access road that led from the main installation to the training annex was designed for single-file traffic, but the sound filling the air now was the overlapping growl of a convoy. Heavy vehicles, moving fast, with the mechanical urgency that accompanies VIP movements in military facilities. 3 black Suburbans came through the gate in tight formation, their tires throwing arcs of crushed stone. They stopped in a line, engines still running, and for a moment, nothing happened. The dust settled, the engines ticked. The Virginia heat pressed down on the courtyard like a wool blanket soaked in warm water. Then the doors opened. From the first vehicle emerged a Marine colonel in full dress uniform, his chest a topography of ribbons and valor devices, his face set in the rigid blankness of a man who is functioning as a human signpost for someone far more important than himself. He moved to the second vehicle and opened the rear passenger door. Rear Admiral Theodore Briggs stepped out. Commander, Naval Special Warfare Command. The man who owned every SEAL team, every training pipeline, every trident in the United States Navy. He was 60 years old, silver-haired, with a face that looked like it had been designed by a committee tasked with creating the physical embodiment of institutional authority. He straightened his cover and looked at the courtyard with eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. From the third vehicle came 2 more figures. Rear Admiral Patricia Solano, Deputy Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, a woman whose reputation in the intelligence community was spoken of in the same hushed tones normally reserved for natural disasters. And beside her, stepping into the Virginia sun with the careful, deliberate movements of a man who understood that his presence in any location fundamentally altered its reality, was Vice Admiral James Harker, Deputy Commander of United States Special Operations Command. 3 stars, the kind of rank that doesn't walk into SEAL compounds without the earth tilting on its axis. Hannigan's platoon snapped to attention with the mechanical precision of men whose bodies responded to rank before their brains could process context. Hannigan himself came to attention, his back straightening, his chin lifting, his entire demeanor transforming in an instant from predator to subordinate. The SEALs stood in a rigid line, eyes forward, chests out. The courtyard suddenly transformed from a casual training space into a parade ground. The 3 admirals walked across the gravel. Their shoes crunched in unison. Their aides and security details fanned out behind them in a choreography that spoke of practiced protocol and significant consequence. Hannigan's eyes tracked them as they approached, his mind already cycling through explanations. The assessment, the woman, the badge, the physical confrontation that 3 of his men had witnessed. They walked past him. They walked past the entire platoon without a glance, without a word, without even the minimal acknowledgement of a nod. 12 of the most elite warfighters in the United States military stood at rigid attention, and 3 flag officers moved through them like wind through grass, their focus fixed on a single point at the far end of the courtyard. The woman. Rear Admiral Briggs reached her first. He stopped. He looked at her. And then Theodore Briggs, Commander of Naval Special Warfare, the sovereign authority over every SEAL operator in the Navy, a man who had sent hundreds of men into combat and received their salutes as his natural due, sank to one knee on the gravel. It was not a bow, it was not theater. It was the ancient instinctive gesture of a warrior acknowledging a debt that rank cannot quantify and protocol cannot express. He placed his right fist over his heart and lowered his head. Rear Admiral Solano followed. One knee on the gravel, fist over heart, head bowed, her dress uniform pressed into the dust without hesitation, without concern for the immaculate white of her service blouse or the gleaming brass of her buttons. Vice Admiral Harker, 3 stars, Deputy Commander of every Special Operations Force in the United States military, was the last to kneel. He did it slowly, not because of reluctance, but because of reverence. His knee touched the gravel, his fist found his heart, and his head lowered until his chin nearly touched his chest. 3 admirals, on their knees, in the gravel, before a woman in cargo pants and a black long-sleeve shirt with a badge that had no name. The silence that fell over that courtyard was not the silence of discipline. It was the silence of revelation, the hollow, ringing void that fills a space when every assumption inside it has been simultaneously and irrevocably destroyed. Hannigan stood at attention, but his body had begun to betray him. A fine tremor ran through his hands. His jaw, that granite monument to self-assurance, had gone slack. His eyes were wide, unblinking, locked on the tableau before him with the fixed stare of a man watching his own reality collapse into a configuration he cannot parse. Petty Officer Jennings felt his knees go weak. Marchetti's face had gone the color of old paper. The other operators stood in their rigid line, comprehension arriving at different speeds across different faces, but arriving nonetheless, the sickening, irreversible understanding that Senior Chief Hannigan had not merely insulted a stranger. He had laid hands on someone that 3 flag officers were kneeling before, someone whose authority existed so far above the visible hierarchy that the hierarchy itself bent in her presence like light bending around a star. "Stand up," the woman said. Her voice was quiet, but carried across the courtyard with the clarity of a bell struck in an empty cathedral. "Please." The Admirals rose. Briggs met her eyes, and in his face was an expression that Hannigan had never seen on a flag officer. Gratitude so profound it bordered on grief. "Architect," Briggs said, "not a name, a call sign. A word that carried the weight of something vast and invisible. A word that Padre Cisneros," now standing in the armory doorway with a phone receiver pressed to his ear, and tears tracking silently down his weathered face, recognized with every fiber of his being. Architect. The call sign attached to the single most classified operative in the United States Special Operations community. The woman who had designed and executed Operation Blackfall, the mission that had neutralized a network of rogue weapons transfers across 3 continents and prevented the detonation of a radiological device in a European capital. The mission that had saved an estimated 40,000 civilian lives and had never, would never appear in any record, any briefing, any history book. The woman who had been listed as killed in action on 7 separate occasions and had returned from death each time, like a rumor that refused to die. "We need to have a conversation about security culture on this compound," Briggs said, his gaze shifting to Hannigan for the first time. The look was not hostile. It was clinical, the dispassionate assessment of a commanding officer identifying a component that has failed and must be replaced. "Senior Chief Hannigan, step forward." Hannigan stepped forward. His boots felt like they were filled with concrete. The gravel crunched beneath him and each step sounded like a countdown. "I have been briefed on your conduct toward this officer over the past 11 minutes, Briggs said. The word officer landed like a hammer blow. Physical contact, verbal harassment, attempted seizure of classified credentials, in front of witnesses, on a recorded compound. He paused. "You are relieved of your position as Alpha Platoon Senior Chief. Effective immediately. You will surrender your trident to the Command Master Chief by 1800 hours. An investigation under Article 128 and Article 133 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice will be initiated before close of business today. Do you understand these instructions? Surrender your trident." The words hit the platoon like shrapnel. The trident, the gold insignia of a Navy SEAL, the symbol that every man in that courtyard had nearly died to earn, the badge that defined their identity more than their names, their families, their own reflections, being stripped from a senior chief in broad daylight, in front of his own men by the Admiral who commanded all SEALs everywhere. Hannigan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He closed it, opened it again. "Yes, sir," he whispered. The words were barely audible, pushed out through a throat that had constricted to the diameter of a straw. His face was white, not pale, white. The white of bone, the white of surrender, the white of a man who has just realized that the woman he tried to humiliate doesn't just outrank him. She exists in a category of service, that his entire career, his entire identity, his every mission and decoration and war story amounts to a footnote in the margin of. Vice Admiral Harker stepped forward and extended his hand to the woman. She took it. "We have a briefing at 1700 at the Annex," he said. "Your assessment of this facility has been invaluable, and your recommendations will be implemented across all NSA compounds within 90 days. She nodded once. Precise. Economical. A movement that contained no excess energy, no performance, no satisfaction at the destruction she had just witnessed. She took no pleasure in Hannigan's fall. There was no triumph in her eyes. There was only the steady, unflickering focus of a woman who had long ago moved beyond the human need for vindication and operated now in a realm where the only metric that mattered was the mission. Rear Admiral Solano placed a hand briefly on the woman's shoulder, a gesture of such rarity from a flag officer of her reputation that the Marine colonel standing by the vehicles visibly blinked. Come home safe this time, Solano said quietly. That's an order. The woman almost smiled. The corners of her mouth shifted by perhaps 2 millimeters. The ghost of an expression, a vestigial remnant of warmth that she allowed to surface for exactly 1 second before it was gone. She turned and walked toward the third Suburban. Her gait was unchanged. That eerie, weightless glide, no arm swing, no rhythm, no signature. She did not look back at Hannigan. She did not look back at the platoon. She did not look back at the compound or the courtyard, or the gravel where 3 admirals had knelt in the dust for her. Looking back was a luxury for people who lived in a single timeline. She lived in the spaces between missions, in the redacted paragraphs of operations that shaped the world without the world's knowledge. And there was always, a next one. She climbed into the Suburban. The door closed with a heavy, hermetic thunk. The tinted windows revealed nothing. Padre Cisneros, standing in the armory doorway, raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute, aimed at the darkened glass. He held it until the vehicle pulled away, its tires whispering across the gravel, and then he held it for 10 seconds longer, saluting the empty space where she had been, saluting the ghost, the architect, the woman whose name the world would never know, and whose work the world would never stop benefiting from. Inside the vehicle, she pulled the lanyard from around her neck and placed the black badge in a steel case that locked with a biometric seal. Beneath the badge, her collarbone bore a small tattoo, a compass rose with no north, the symbol of an operative who navigates without fixed direction, who becomes whatever the mission requires, and leaves no trace when it's done. The secure tablet mounted in the seat back activated as the vehicle merged onto the highway. Green text on black screen. No sender identification. No timestamp. Lighthouse confirms. Package Bravo reassigned. Proceed to grid November 7. Window opens at Oro 300 Zulu. She read the message. The screen wiped. She leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes. Outside, the Virginia landscape blurred past. Green pines, gray asphalt. The ordinary world spinning on its ordinary axis, oblivious to the woman passing through it like a current through deep water, unseen and unstoppable. 4 counts in. 4 counts hold. 4 counts out. The vehicle turned east toward the coast and disappeared into traffic. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Beyond the Rank for more.